So settle in and listen, because this is the story of the Holloway Farm. These places have a rhythm to them, a cycle of planting and harvest that's been repeated for generations. But sometimes, when you dig into the history of a piece of land, you find that not every season ended with a celebration. Some farms have darker stories buried in their soil, stories that never quite settled, never quite went quiet. And the people who live on these properties, they're not just dealing with creaky floors and drafty windows. They're living alongside something that refuses to leave. Tonight, I want to tell you about one of those places. A farm in rural Iowa where the past didn't just leave echoes. It left something active, something intelligent, and something that still walks the property after dark. The property sits about 40 minutes outside of Cedar Rapids, tucked into a landscape of rolling hills and endless cornfields. It's a 160-acre spread that's been farmland since the 1870s. The main house is a classic two-story farmhouse, white clapboard with a wraparound porch. There's a massive red barn about 100 yards from the house, a smaller equipment shed, and a chicken coop that nobody's used in decades. It looks, for all intents and purposes, like a postcard, like something you'd see in a magazine about American heritage. But the Keller family, the people who bought the place in 2018, they'll tell you a very different story. Tom and Linda Keller had been looking for a farm for years. They wanted to get out of the city, wanted their two kids to grow up with some space, some quiet. When they found the Holloway property, it seemed perfect. The price was surprisingly low for the acreage, but the realtor explained that away easily enough. The place had been empty for almost 3 years. The previous owners had moved out suddenly, left most of their furniture behind, and sold it through a bank. Foreclosure, the realtor said. Tough times for farmers. The Kellers didn't think much of it. They made an offer, it was accepted, and by June they were moving in. The first week was normal, exhausting, but normal. Boxes everywhere, furniture to arrange, repairs to make. The house had good bones but needed work. Some of the floorboards on the second floor were loose. The barn door didn't close properly. Standard old house stuff. It was their daughter Emily, who was 12 at the time, who first mentioned that something felt off. She told her mom that she didn't like going into the barn. When Linda asked why, Emily just shrugged and said it felt like someone was always standing behind her in there. Linda chalked it up to an unfamiliar place, a kid's imagination adjusting to the move. But then Tom started noticing things too. He'd be out in the barn in the evening, organizing tools or working on the old tractor he'd bought with the property, and he'd hear footsteps. Not animal sounds. Not the scurrying of a raccoon or the flutter of a bird. Footsteps. The distinct sound of boots on the wooden floor of the hayloft above him. The first time it happened, he called out, thinking maybe Emily or his son Jake had followed him out there. No answer. He climbed the ladder to the loft and found it completely empty. Just hay bales, dust, and the fading light coming through the gaps in the walls. He went back down, returned to his work, and 10 minutes later, the footsteps started again. Same deliberate pace, same road across the loft. He didn't go back up. He just packed up his tools and went inside. Linda had her own experience a few days later. She was in the kitchen. It was mid-afternoon, bright and sunny, and she was putting away groceries. The kitchen window looks out over the back field, and as she was standing at the sink, she saw a man walk past the window. Just a quick glimpse, but it was clear. A man in dark clothing, moving from left to right, heading toward the barn. Her first thought was that Tom had come back from town early. But then she remembered that Tom had taken both kids with him. She was alone on the property. She went to the back door, opened it, and called out. Nothing. She walked around the side of the house following the path the man would have taken. There was no one there. And here's the part that made her skin crawl. The back field, the area between the house and the barn, had been tilled recently. The soil was soft and dark. If someone had walked through it, there would have been footprints. There were none. If you're enjoying these stories and want to dive deeper into the unexplained, make sure you subscribe to Whispers Beyond. We're bringing you real accounts from real people who've experienced things they can't explain, and there's so much more to explore. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. After that sighting, Linda started asking around. She talked to neighbors, people who'd lived in the area for decades, trying to get a sense of the property's history. And that's when she learned about Raymond Holloway. The farm had been in the Holloway family for 4 generations. Raymond was the last Holloway to work the land. He'd inherited it from his father in the 1980s, and by all accounts, he loved that farm more than anything else in his life. And the figure of a man in work clothes, seen at a distance, always near the barn, always walking with a purpose. He worked it alone for nearly 30 years, living in that same house, working in that same barn, following the same routines his father and grandfather had followed before him. In 2012, Raymond suffered a massive heart attack while working in the barn. He was alone when it happened, and by the time a neighbor found him 2 days later, he was gone. The property passed to a distant cousin who had no interest in farming. It sat empty for a few years, then was rented out to a family who lasted less than a year before breaking their lease and leaving. That family, Linda learned, had reported strange occurrences too. Tools that moved on their own in the barn. The sound of someone working late at night when no one was there. Armed with this information, the Kellers had a choice. They could panic, put the place back on the market, take a loss, and leave. Or they could try to coexist with whatever presence was still lingering on the property. They chose to stay. They'd put too much into the place to walk away. And honestly, while the experiences were unsettling, nothing had been threatening. It was more like they were sharing the farm with someone who didn't realize he didn't belong there anymore. Just a calm, deliberate walk into the darkness of the woods. Tom had planted a small crop of soybeans on about 20 acres, just to see if he could make a go of actual farming. It was his first real harvest, and he was out in the field from dawn till well after dark, running the combine he'd borrowed from a neighbor. One evening around 9 o'clock he was finishing up the last few rows. It was pitch black except for the combine's headlights. He was exhausted, ready to call it a night, when he saw someone standing at the edge of the field. Just standing there, motionless, right at the tree line. Tom stopped the combine and climbed down, assuming it was Linda or one of the kids checking on him. He called out, no response. Tom followed because at that point he needed to know. He needed to confirm what he was seeing. He reached the tree line and pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight and swept it across the woods. Nothing. No movement, no sound, no sign that anyone had been there. But here's what made him stop cold. The ground at the edge of the field was soft from a recent rain. Tom's boots had left clear prints in the mud as he walked toward the trees. But where the man had been standing, where Tom had clearly seen him, there were no prints at all. Just smooth, undisturbed mud. That was the moment Tom Keller became a believer. Whatever was on his property, it wasn't a squatter or a trespasser. It was something else entirely. Something that looked solid, that moved like a person, but left no trace. He went back to the house and told Linda everything. They sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight trying to figure out what to do. And that's when they heard it. A sound coming from the barn. The unmistakable metallic screech of the barn door being rolled open on its track. They both went to the window. From the kitchen you can see the barn clearly. The big sliding door was standing wide open, and the interior of the barn was illuminated by a soft, flickering light, like someone had lit a lantern inside. Tom grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, and Linda called out that maybe they should call the police, but Tom was already heading out the door. He crossed the yard quickly, Linda right behind him, and as they approached the barn, the light inside went out, just snuffed out instantly, like someone had blown out a candle. They stepped inside and Tom swept his flashlight across the space. The barn was empty. No person, no lantern, no source for the light they'd both clearly seen. But the tools that Tom had carefully organized on the workbench just that morning, were scattered across the floor. Wrenches, hammers, screwdrivers, all of them thrown down in a heap. And in the dust on the workbench, someone had drawn a symbol. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A circle with a cross through it, the kind of mark you'd use to divide something into quarters. Linda recognized it immediately. It was a surveyor's mark, the kind that would have been used to section off farmland decades ago, always moving with purpose like he was still tending to chores that needed doing. We've got more stories that'll make you question what's really out there, waiting just beyond the veil. Hit that button and join us. After that night, the activity became a regular part of their lives. It wasn't constant, but it was consistent. Every few weeks, something would happen. The barn door would be found open in the morning even though Tom had locked it the night before. The sound of someone working, The clang of metal on metal, the thud of something heavy being moved would echo from the barn in the middle of the night. And the figure, the man in the work clothes, was seen regularly by all 4 family members. The Kellers eventually reached out to a local paranormal investigation team. The investigators spent 2 nights on the property, setting up cameras and audio recorders in the barn and around the exterior of the house. They captured some compelling evidence. EVP recordings of a man's voice saying phrases like "not done yet" and "my land." Thermal imaging that showed a human-shaped heat signature in the barn when no one was physically present. And on the second night, 2 of the investigators had their own encounter. They were standing in the barn, conducting an EVP session, asking questions into the darkness, when they both heard footsteps on the loft. They turned on their flashlights and saw, just for a moment, the silhouette of a man standing at the top of the ladder. They called out, asking if anyone was there, and the figure stepped back out of the beam of the light and was gone. The lead investigator told the Kellers what she believed. The property was home to a residual haunting, but with some intelligent elements. Raymond Holloway, she said, had never truly left his farm. His love for the land, his identity so wrapped up in the work he did there, had created an imprint. Most of the activity, the footsteps, the sounds of work being done, those were just echoes. Moments replaying over and over like a recording. But the sightings, the figure that watched from the tree line, the barn door being opened, those suggested that some part of Raymond was still aware, still present, still trying to do the work he'd always done. The Kellers still live on the Holloway Farm. They've made peace with their unusual tenant. Tom leaves the barn door unlocked at night now. He says it's easier than having it forced open. Linda plants flowers near the spot where she first saw the figure walk past the kitchen window, a small acknowledgement of the man who built this place. And the kids, Emily and Jake, they've grown used to the sounds from the barn, the glimpses of a man who never quite leaves his post. Because in the end, that's what this story is really about. A man whose entire life was defined by a piece of land, who worked it with his own hands, who poured his soul into every acre. And when his body gave out, when his time was up, some part of him just couldn't let go. He's still there, still walking his fields, still tending to his barn, still doing the only thing he ever knew how to do. It's not malicious. It's not evil. It's just deeply, profoundly sad. A ghost trapped not by chains or curses but by love. Love for a place that's no longer his, and work that's no longer his to do. The Holloway Farm is a reminder that haunted places aren't always born from tragedy or violence. Sometimes they're born from something much quieter. From a life lived with purpose, from a connection so deep it leaves a mark that time can't erase. And if you ever find yourself driving through rural Iowa, past fields of corn and soybeans, past old barns and farmhouses that have stood for 100 years, just remember, some of those places are still being tended, still being watched over, by hands you can't see and a presence that never truly said goodbye.